I'll introduce myself properly in a second, but by way of a description, because that's a useful thing for those of us who can't see. I am, some people have said I'm ruggedly handsome, but what do I know? I'm blind. So no, I'm a white male, late 20s, have some stubble, and I'm wearing my trademark cap with my logo on it, an eye with two crossed swords going through it from the top down. And I'm backed by numerous figures and pieces of gaming and other memorabilia on the wall behind me, for if that's any context. But with that, let's switch into the presentation. And are we good? Are we switched in? Hopefully so. Cool. Yep.
Looks cooking.
So, hello everyone. I am SightlessKombat, and welcome to Sea of Thieves, from Landlubber to Pirate Legend. Thank you very much to the kind folks at AxeCon for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and very much looking forward to presenting this to you today. Now, as for who I am SightlessKombat, accessibility consultant and gamer without sight, having never had any sight whatsoever. From the UK, sometimes I'm shortened down to SightlessKombat or SK. Any of those three are absolutely fine. As I say, I am a gamer without sight. When I say that, I mean, I use the term because legal blindness, which is often just shortened to being blind, can and often does include usable and or residual vision, which I've never had. So I have absolutely no sight whatsoever, just to completely clear that up for anybody who is still confused, which happens more often than you'd think, to my amusement, to be totally honest. But yeah, I do primarily work in video games, but I've done projects around escape rooms in Australia and London, amongst many other things. I've done some accessibility testing for various other clients as well. But video games wise, I write reviews for my website, which will be on the links slide at the end. I also do streams on Twitch and create content for YouTube and post things to Twitter as well, depending on what I'm doing. And all of those will be on the links at the end too. But in terms of credits, I've worked with not just with Xbox. So I've worked with the Coalition on Gears 5 for navigation ping escape mode, or just escape ping for short. I'm in the credits for Halo Infinite, the online credits, and my most recent credit was actually for Horizon Forbidden West on PlayStation. So that was a massive thing to be able to be involved in. So it's not just, I don't just play Xbox, I play PC, I play PlayStation. I'll play pretty much anything that's accessible to varying degrees. But as for this presentation, I'm going to be discussing the accessibility features of Sea of Thieves implemented by Rare, and how I generally play the game, as well as my journey to the eponymous rank in the title, Pirate Legend. But let's start from the very beginning with, well, arguably the biggest question: what is Sea of Thieves? Sea of Thieves is an open world pirate sandbox. So take all the fun fantasies of swashbuckling and swordsmanship you may have had as a child, in terms of piracy on the high seas, and then implement that into the interactive medium of video games. And from there, you pretty much have it. Things like burying treasure, firing cannons at other players, we'll come onto that later, and, fighting off sea monsters and things as well, because, why not? So, but as I say, that's just the broad overview, really. But let's start where I started, and pretty much anybody would with this game, the beginning. So Sea of Thieves was announced in 2015 at E3, and again had a trailer in 2016, both of which had describably, what may be described as shanty-style music. So the main theme, called Maiden Voyage, was used in the first trailer, and then the song later to become known as We Shall Sail Together was introduced in the 2016 trailer. And I thought, this is amazing. This will be really good fun. In terms of, I want to sail around with my friends and have a great laugh. And, that's where I was, because we didn't have much to go on in terms of accessibility information or anything. And audio description wasn't really a thing at the time either in trailers. So I just had to either guess what was going on or just ask people and they would just tell me, or read comments like, oh my word, there's skeletons everywhere. So, or, there's ships firing cannons and all of that. So you just had to work with what you got. That is until I was able to play it at E3 2017. So there's a picture of me playing the game at E3 2017 where Sea of Thieves was debuted in its live, playable, and at that point, unreleased state in 2017. It was my first E3 I could actually go to, thanks to the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, or WCMT Fellowship, that I undertook, where I got to go around the States for 5 weeks, including to E3, to Valve, to NVIDIA, and a bunch of other places as well, to Microsoft too, and discuss game accessibility with loads of people. That was a lot of fun, and E3 was a massive highlight of that for me. But also because it was the first E3 that was open to the public. So me and many, many other people got to go to what was essentially the industry's largest trade show, essentially gathering loads and loads of people in one place. Now, as for Sea of Thieves, though, that year's E3, I wasn't really sure what to expect. So I went and talked to some of the devs, and Joe Neat was one. I'm sure Mike Chapman might have been a second, and I'm not entirely sure who the third one was from memory. But the point being, I had a chat with these 3 lovely devs from Rare and said, look, what do you think I can do as a gamer without sight in this game? What is my role? What is my job on the ship, if you like? And they turned around, they sort of looked at each other for a moment, then they turned around and said, well, you could always steer the ship. Now, to me, if I'm honest, that was kind of laughable at first, because without any context, without having any ability to try the game firsthand, it doesn't make any sense. As many people would say to me later, having a blind guy steer the ship? What? So that was very interesting indeed to see that. But all I really could do was laugh at first, because I was kind of skeptical. As much as I wanted to try it out, I was still like, how is this going to work? But it turned out I was incorrect, and with a little practice and some advice and instructions from the lovely dev team and the people running the stations, I was sailing pretty confidently with the rest of my crew, the 3 other people on the stations around me. And we sailed right through the middle of a couple of ships, at least 2 actually, having a massive battle of their own, with a few cannonballs nearly hitting us and colliding with our vessel. But that's beside the point. We got through pretty much unscathed and had a pretty good time of it, all things considered. At least there's one thing I can say, and that is that I was better than the one pirate who decided to not only drink all the grog, but then try and navigate us with the map upside down as well, to the result of much laughter and derision from me and pretty much everyone else, just because it was so out of character and unexpected. But there wasn't much in the way of accessibility in this build, unfortunately, not really. Hence me having to even ask, arguably. That might be down to that as well to an extent. But what about launch? So there's a title screen for Sea of Thieves Season 5 here, but that was just to have a title screen there. And there's a quote in there, Sea of Friends, with a question mark, because that's what a lot of people say. Oh, they say, oh, it's not Sea of Thieves. It's not Sea of Friends, it's Sea of Thieves. And that's arguably creates more toxicity than it should, which is a real shame. And I kind of experienced elements of that myself to an extent. So, I wanted to party up with crews from all over the world and sail the seas, dig up treasure, fire cannons at skellies, and do whatever I could at the time within reason. But it turns out being a gamer without sight is a pretty hard sell to pretty much anybody who doesn't understand or, isn't aware that people who have no sight can play video games in the first place, which is a real shame, as I said before. So I got called a troll. People said it wasn't possible, and they were just very, very confused, which was, frustrating to me, because I just wanted to get involved and play the same game as everybody else. And I kept saying to people, I have no sight. And they're like, no, you can't be blind. You've got to be joking. You have no sight at all. Yeah, right. I'm not believing you. And then I realized that I'd probably have to get it through in a different way. So in an in-game fashion, I thought, how can I best convey this? And I was like, fine. I'm a pirate with an eye patch over both eyes. From there, it kind of worked. It wasn't the most reliable way to get it across, but once people understood, they were like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yes." So, we went from there pretty much. Once I started saying that, I'm a pirate with an eye patch over each eye, they sort of understood it to an extent. But that doesn't mean it was easy or, oh God, to use a pun, that doesn't mean it was all smooth sailing from there. But let's start looking at how I actually play Sea of Thieves and how it works as a game, because we talked a lot about what it is and, some of the issues I faced before, but what about how the game actually works? So navigation, and there's a shot of my pirate avatar in game holding a compass and sort of looking around, wondering what way to go. Uh, so, navigation is a big problem in video games. Navigation of open world environments is a huge issue that developers rarely solve for, if at all, because a lot of people don't understand that games of that site exist, or if they do, they're just not sure how to solve for the problem in the first place. Games like The Last of Us 2 are really an exception because they allow pretty much full agency to a great degree, where I can play the game start to finish without needing any sighted assistance whatsoever. With admittedly a few flaws, but that's a discussion for another day. Sea of Thieves is pretty much the same. Sea of Thieves, or SOT, or SOT, depending on how you want to pronounce it, like sort of shorten it down, is pretty much the same, relying on competent crew callouts to get anywhere. Now, what I'm going to show you is a very quick clip from a live stream from relatively recently, where I have to navigate manually, and I'll tell you kind of where that was in a second. So let's just roll the footage.
Okay, and 2 years go left a bit. Keep going left.
Oh, okay. Oh, are you just going to try and harpoon me in?
Lefty.
Is that what
no,
you're going to do?
we're at the back end of the ship. And stop forward. And stop. And left a bit. And stop. And the ladder is right in front of you.
Sorry.
You should be able to push X.
Yay!
And up you go.
Hey, there we go. And then just drop
you
this.
You can just drop it there.
There we go. Yay!
And Paddy will...
And yes, I am fully aware that video clip ends rather abruptly. And so essentially there was a lot going on there. But Mina, the other voice that you can hear in that footage that isn't me, it makes that look much easier than it actually is. So the reason we had to do manual navigation in that particular scenario, normally you would navigate using the compass in Sea of Thieves. So as a pirate, if you want to navigate easily with a lot less stress than just running around, literally running around, you would use the compass. You would pull it out, you would hold right trigger, it would vibrate as you walk around, because that's used for finding treasure. But we kind of adapted that workflow for being able to navigate me. So it would be, move left a bit, right a bit. But then once we realized the compass would work, it was move, 10 paces forward, turn to your left slightly, etc. But the unfortunate thing is the vibrational elements of the compass don't work in water, which is a real shame. So you have to then use navigation like that. So left a bit, right a bit, back a bit, forwards a tad, turn left a smidge, and you go from there. Again, as I say, not ideal, but it definitely works to an extent. But, speaking of haptics and the compass and vibration and things, let's move on to the primary method of navigating things that are larger than a pirate in Sea of Thieves, and one of the primary roles that I assumed all those years ago and still keep to this day, that being the helm. And there's a picture, again, of my avatar standing in the old text, steadfastly at the helm of the wheel of a ship. And essentially, I've just in all my various costumes there. So the way the helm works is via haptics once again. So essentially each ship has a varying number of notches to the left or right. So there are three types of ships in Sea of Thieves. So there's a galley or a galleon, which has up to 4 people, a brigantine or a brig, which has up to 3, and a sloop, which has 1 or 2 people on board. And you can kind of vary those as you go. You can have a person soloing on a galley, should you really wish to put yourself through that much pain. At least that's what I've heard. But So the way that works is you have each ship, depending on its class, if you like, has a different number of turns to the left or right on the wheel, a different number of notches, as we say. So a brig, a galley has 8 to the left or right, a brig has 6, and a sloop has 4. So that indicates, how many turns of how much turning you have to do to get to full lock, as we call it, hard left or hard right. And each of those notches is indicated via a very subtle haptic. It takes a little while to know what to feel for, but it is there. And as I say, it took practice, but it's good fun when you can get the hang of it. Now, Rare, in their infinite wisdom, added an update while I was actually writing and rehearsing this presentation that added additional audio cues to the helm. So those additional audio cues line up with the haptics and indicate roughly how far you've turned by a panning sound effect. Now, fishing, which also uses haptics in kind of a similar manner in terms of their usefulness, doesn't have such a thing yet, but who knows, that might be added in later. We'll come on to how fishing works. But essentially, being at the helm, it takes effort and it takes practice, but it's definitely worth learning. And we will have a clip of that in just a second to show you how it works, because it doesn't sound like the easiest thing, but once you understand how it actually functions in practice, partly because it's all down to the way you're facing, which I'll come on to in a second. So let's roll the clip and you'll see helm navigation and something a little extra as well.
West, north,
Southwest, yeah?
West, northwest.
Just checking.
West.
Gonna need to start pulling in.
West.
And by pulling in, I mean straightening up, essentially.
West, southwest.
Or just maneuvering.
West, southwest.
Pull in and just make a slightly
West, southwest.
shorter turn.
West, southwest. West, southwest.
And
West, southwest.
wait for it.
West, southwest.
Just
West, southwest.
streamlining ourselves.
Southwest.
There we go. And then just move.
Southwest. Southwest.
There we go. So I am purely utilizing the haptics there. The audio cues that were added relatively late into the presentation sort of cycle, so I couldn't actually get footage of those in time to show you how they work. But rest assured, if you ever come and watch me live stream the game on Twitch or see any footage, more recent footage that I end up publishing on YouTube, you will end up seeing that. But the voice you heard in the background, we'll come on to a little later, but that was part of a feature called nautical narration. Now that not only narrates where your compass is facing, what direction you're facing when you're using your compass when you are on foot, as it were, so when you're actually just playing as your pirate, but it also works when you're steering the ship as you just saw there. So I got a check from my crew asking, what direction we needed to be going to, and I knew what direction I was clear to steer, and I steered pretty much from there, just using those prompts of what direction we were currently facing, which is a lot simpler than what we had to do before, which was, a few to the left, 4 to the right, straighten up. Sometimes we still use that methodology, but it's definitely not the only way we do it now when there are easier ways of doing things. And, in terms of, navigating your ship, like steering it through the seas, it's actually it's just useful to have multiple methods of doing things available to you. But speaking of multiple methods of doing things in the game, as much as you can fight hand to hand with various enemies, most of the time, a lot of the time you will just need cannons. So I'm actually shooting the cannon in this picture, or my pirate avatar is rather, and Mina is standing behind me spotting for me. But I bet you're wondering how this works. What would a pirate ship be without cannons? Because it's not just players. It's you have to contend with. It's the shivers of sharks and the ghost fleets and the iconic skeletons, of course, amongst numerous other, horrors of the deep, as you might say. Now, there's no auto aim in Sea of Thieves that would allow me to actually hit anything with, any of the ranged weapons, and there's no real targeting system for close range either. So essentially, it comes down once again to my crew. So they will call, once I'm on a cannon, which I've kind of learnt to do. I've kind of learned to find my way to the cannons via a number of paces, as I said before. So that works relatively well unless I get stuck on geometry, which is really frustrating, but it's a thing that most players have to contend with to varying extents. But my crew will get me to a cannon, put me on, give me cannonballs, and then they will navigate me just up, down, left, right. And sometimes I'll be able to do it myself if, say it's way over to the right and and instead of being in the center, so I will then move my cannon as far to the right as I can and work from there, lining it up to the best of my vague ability with just the audio alone, which again, not ideal, but it kind of helps. At least it helps smooth the process out. And then we usually have, because we normally play as a crew of 4, we usually have 2 people down on the beach fighting skellies and being ready to draw skellies in, because while me and whoever my spotter is at the time are on the ship firing marker shots, that's where the crew on the beach are going to look to find, where to draw the skellies to. So we'll make essentially set a trap for the skellies or whatever enemies it happens to be when they're beached, at least. And we will go from there. When it's, seabound stuff, I'm not normally on the cannons for that. I'm usually steering the ship. But when I have to be, or when I want to be, then it works kind of a similar way, except there's no need for markers. It's just left, right, up, down, fire! As you will see in this next clip. There is a small queue for headshots on enemies as well, which is very, very worthwhile. If you listen closely, you might be able to pick it out, but you'll see a couple of those in this brief clip showing how it all works in practice.
Right a bit and down.
Oh.
Right a bit more. Oh, they've disappeared behind the rock. Fire.
Can you get any lower?
More.
Can you get any lower than that?
There. That's the lowest I can get.
Fire!
Hey!
Perfect.
Perfect.
There's the sound cue for a headshot as well. Lovely. That was cool.
Left a little bit. Up a little bit. Well, that was too much.
Oh.
Down a bit. Fire.
It's fun. You can control. Oh, hit the rock. Nice.
All right, we'll just put it back. Right a bit. Down a bit.
Yep.
Fire.
Hey, double.
Whack. We'll just keep it there. Just leave it there, and we will. Are you about out of cannonballs now?
Yeah. So that was Mina and Mike really mostly doing a lot of that. And as you can hear, it works pretty well. And the small headshot cue was that sort of metallic thunk that you would have heard a couple of times when we all reacted at once. And the reason I knew, that was the only reason I knew I was getting those headshots, just because of that cue being there. But what if you want to do something a little more relaxing on the Sea of Thieves, something less stressful even than steering the ship, which, you might not think is stressful, but it really can be if you're sailing through a storm, for instance. How about fishing? So I'm standing at the edge of a pier. I'm standing at the edge of a pier in-game, fishing, and yeah, so that's what that shot is. But fishing, as I said earlier, works via haptics, and I mean, I'll let my past self explain it a little from an in-game explanation I recorded on stream. But essentially, the way it works is you cast your line in. Once I'm guided to a location, that is. So again, you have to be either guided or know where you're going roughly, at least, and not get stuck on anything. And by a safe location, I would say that means that you have to, when you reel your line in, you don't want it to snap on anything, like snag on anything, or just snap of its own volition, which does happen every once in a while and is infuriating when you've nearly caught a fish. So once you're guided to a safe location and you're told that you're good to go, you can load up with any bait because of the menu accessibility, which again, we'll come on to a little later. Don't worry, it'll all make sense. And you then load up, you cast out, and you can then essentially feel for the haptics. So there are haptics when the fish take a bite, so they grab onto your line, and then there are haptics indicating when you're moving in the incorrect direction. So the only direction you want to be moving in is the one where the haptics are not able to be felt. So because the fish pull in different directions, there are no arrows on screen, there are no clear indicators other than just looking at the fish itself. But you'll see that in this little clip that pretty much shows you how it works anyway. So I'll let my past self reiterate what I've just said, possibly in a far better fashion than I've just done. Waiting for a fish. There's a fish. Right. So the fish is pulling to the right. I'm pulling to the left. And listening. Pulling to the right now because I had haptics there. and they're normally in the opposing direction to where you were before. So lots of sound design here. Is it going to stop moving? Come on. Come on. There we go. Reeling it in. And rinse and repeat. So there I was listening for the fish to stop moving before I could reel it in, because if you can, I think, reel it in to an extent, but if you reel it in too much, it will just snap the line and escape, which is not what you want when you need to sell it on later and you need to just catch it to get everything done. So up until now, we've been talking about how the game works, you know, how my crew are very, very helpful and an integral part of the experience, how haptics work, how audio cues are helpful as well. But what about getting into the game? So here's a screenshot, here's a couple of screenshots of the accessibility menu of Sea of Thieves as of recently. And the way this works, so this is covering, you know, menu and UI narration. That is the primary element of this. So Sea of Thieves, like several other Xbox Game Studios, you know, titles, uses Let Games Read to Me. And that is a platform feature that allows you to pass text strings through and have them read out at a, you know, rate and through a voice of your choice, for instance, amongst many other things. So titles like, you know, Crackdown 3, Forza Horizon 5, Gears 5, you will see various titles using either that implementation or very similar ones. Sea of Thieves menu narration was actually added post-launch. So when the game launched, there was no menu narration, including for things like the inventory, which was a bit of a problem because then you had to play a memory game of where's my compass, where's my fishing rod, where's my banjo, or anything else. But there was, you know, so having the menu narration added at all was brilliant. It was a great step forward. But there was one big issue with the fluidity, but it is a relatively subtle thing that you might not pick up on. So I'm going to roll the clip and you will see, you might see what I'm getting at. So let's just roll this. This is pretty much as it would have been when it launched.
Narrate change only. Game options. Settings. Language. Narrate change only. When using game's transcription, limit the narrated elements to the focused item. Game options. Settings. Language. Text chat scale. This set game options. Settings. Language. Narrate UI elements on mouse hover. Game options. Settings. Language. Toast message duration.
Noticing anything
Game
yet?
options. Settings. Language. Narrate toast messages. Include toast messages.
If you're
in
not, I'll
game
clarify in a
transcription.
second.
On value 1 of 2. Option 6 of 16. Controller D-pad up for previous option. Controller D-pad down for next option. Controller D-pad left for previous value. Controller D-pad right for next value. Controller B button for back.
So actually, there's a couple of things I'm going to clarify here. So the main thing I want you to be aware of is that there is a lot of repeated text at the beginning of each menu item. So when you're scrolling up and down, it's saying settings, language, you know, or game options, settings, language, and then the option and, you know, its value and everything. The second thing is that you can't adjust the rate of speech. So you're sitting there waiting for at least 5 seconds every time for every single UI element to read its option, like what it is and its values, which is a bit of, you know, a bit of a time, well, not time waster, but a time killer, arguably, in the sense that you are waiting far longer than any sighted player would have to pretty much ever to get the same information. But Rare, once again, in their infinite wisdom, added an amazing tiny feature called Narrate Change Only relatively recently as part of their slew of updates, of which 52% contained accessibility features in 2020, which is 2021, which is absolutely phenomenal. So Narrate Change Only pretty much does what it says on the tin. So I'm going to roll a clip and see if you notice a big difference here.
Maiden voyage. Arena. Battle other crews in swift contests.
So even there you would notice
Game
it.
options. Settings. Controller. Input. Gameplay. HUD. Video set. Graphics settings. Audio setting. Language. Text chat in menus. Text to speech. Speech to text override. Game transcription override. Translate other players. Narrate toast
Do
messages.
you see the difference now?
Toast message durate. Narrate
Maybe.
UI elements on narrate change only. When using games transcription, limit the narrated elements to the focused item. On value 1 of 2. Option 9 of 16.
And all the
Controller D-pad up for previous
usual
option.
babble from the
Controller
game,
D-pad down for next option. Controller D-pad
indicating
left for
controller
previous
values and
value.
things.
Controller D-pad right for next value. Controller B button for back.
Not controller values, controller inputs rather. That's what that always indicates at the end. I'm not quite sure why it has to be so long-winded, but that might be something to do with the implementation itself. But the big difference you will have noticed pretty much immediately, because the narrate change only applies across everything, so all of the menus, it removes all of that filler text. So all of the game options, settings, language, it removes all of that every time you move. So it's not game options, settings, language, controller, game options, settings, language, input. It's controller, input, and then you can just keep scrolling and finding what you want, which is massive. That is a huge boost in productivity and fluidity in game, and that's massive evidence to support the idea that tiny tweaks can make sometimes the biggest difference. And that is a huge thing, and I can't wait to see where those kinds of small changes get other games as well as Sea of Thieves. But now on to back to an integral part that we've already kind of touched on, but I thought I better elaborate on as well. Crews. So this is not my POV. This is the point of view of one of the other members of the crew, as I have evidently fired a cannonball into the middle of a bunch of skellies. So this is what you're seeing now is what I was saying about marker shots earlier, for those of you who can see, where crew are on the beach and we fired into the middle of a bunch of skellies who are now very much exploding in very much rare Sea of Thieves fashion. Crews, the amount of people I've crewed up with over the years are, if I wanted to thank everybody, which I would love to, that is in a list far too long to give. We would be here for hours, if not days. But I realized after a while of playing that, if I wanted to get anywhere meaningful, the best course of action for me would arguably be to get a regular crew together and, train those people so that at the very least I have one crew, and then just keep training other people, as needed when, they need to be filled in for, instead of having to train everybody each time I start a session and that taking up, 2 hours plus of time or however long it happened to take that particular day. Now, I happened to get a very lucky break when Captain Logan of the Keelhauled podcast, a community run, podcast, decided to contact me very graciously and reach out and ask if I wanted to talk about accessibility and, if I wanted to be on that podcast. And I very, very much flattered I accepted. And after having a big, long discussion about accessibility on the podcast, Logan then contacted me a little while afterwards and said, hey, there's a few pirates who want to run with you. And I was like, yeah, that's really cool. Let me know, send the details on. And that was brilliant. And from then, I met Mina and Paddy, and then later on Mike as well, amongst others. And now, Mina, Paddy, and Mike are pretty much my regular crew on the Xbox Ambassador streams, because I'm an Xbox Ambassador, I'm an Xbox MVP, I'm a community champion, and I'm a play host. So I stream over on the Xbox Ambassadors channel, playing Sea of Thieves amongst many other things as well. But Sea of Thieves is quite a common fixture. But the upshot being that, we have to get people to fill in sometimes, but having a regular crew who knows not only my strengths and weaknesses and limitations, but their own as well, and then you can just have people jump in. That is a massive, breath of fresh air. That's a great thing to be able to have. Now, you're probably wondering what, there's one thing you've not talked about. That's probably what you're saying at the moment, which is Pirate Legend. So let's dive into that. So what is Pirate Legend? And there's a shot from the celebration stream that I did. There's an in-game shot of all of us pirates sort of marking, having, all Pirate Legends together and all of that, which was a fantastic moment. But Pirate Legend, let me, roll back a step slightly, because there are multiple factions in Sea of Thieves. So you fish for the Hunter's Call, you find cursed skulls for the Order of Souls. You do cargo runs for the Merchant Alliance, and all that kind of thing. There are others as well. There are the Reaper's Bones who do PvP, so player versus player. They encourage essentially fighting over, each other's loot and whatnot as well. But there are multiple factions in Sea of Thieves, and they each have a certain level. So you can be level 1 in Hunter's Call, level 10 in Order of Souls, level 50 in the Merchant Alliance, for instance. And the reason I mentioned level 50 is because if you get 3 of those multiple factions to level 50, any 3, you then are able to obtain the coveted rank of Pirate Legend. Needless to say, it is a relatively time-consuming grind, but it is definitely worth it. And if you play with the right people, it can be a lot of fun and not feel like a complete chore. As people have sometimes described it as. I personally thought it was a lot of fun. But coming onto that, the journey. Essentially, my journey to Pirate Legend started at launch in 2018 when the game first came out. And prior to September 2021, I thought I was pretty much set to be the first gamer without sight that I knew of, at least, to obtain the 3 level 50 commendations, or the 3 level 50s in those factions that I'd got at that point high 30s, low 40s in. If memory serves, it was Order of Souls, Merchant Alliance, and the Gold Hoarders that I was going for. Yeah, Order of Souls, Merchant Alliance, and yeah, as far as I remember, that's what I was going for, at least. But the point being, I thought I was going to be the first game without sight to get that, or at the very least, the one of, if not the first, until a fellow gamer without sight by the name of Shay Shasters, who is also an Xbox ambassador. She told me, "Oh, I am level 25 in whatever faction it happened to be," and it turned out that she'd been leveling up with a crew. She'd sort of been reinvigorated to play because of what they call a gold and glory weekend. And the gold and glory weekend is essentially where all your reputation and XP and renown and things are doubled. So that definitely helps a lot in terms of speeding up your leveling process. And slightly concerned how quickly Shay was gaining on me. It turned from a competition, well, not a competition, it turned from just me and her both trying to go for it into a sort of friendly rivalry as to who would be the first gamer without sight that either of us knew to get it, to claim this coveted title. And over a period of days, many days, many hours of sort of grinding and leveling up and finding crews and using, in my case, the Xbox looking for group feature, which allows you to essentially put out an advert and say, "Hey, I want to do Pirate Legend grinding things to get my levels to where they need to be." All of that, including meeting up with completely new crews and taking down skeleton fleets as a team of 3 instead of 4, which was very stressful but extremely fun at the end and satisfying, amongst many other adventures on the seas. The end result was on the 21st of September. I couldn't find a time because the achievement wouldn't give me one, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would. I earned the title of Pirate Legend after a very long, hard fought, but very good fun, friendly rivalry. And as for Shay, she earned it a day later, and we were both able to bask in the glory of having claimed this title and not having to go for anything as significant as that, because even the stuff of obtaining level 75 in a faction, which I believe there is an achievement for each one, isn't as significant as gaining it in 3 at once, because Pirate Legend has been a thing since the game pretty much first started. Now, takeaways. Sea of Thieves is a game that still requires sighted assistance. There is no getting around that at the present time, at least. And, you need assistance to pretty much get anywhere. So if that's through the tutorial, out of your starting tavern when you begin a game, though there are, of course, workarounds for elements of that, like raising the anchor so that you don't have to, so that you can then spawn directly on the ship if your crew have raised your anchor before you spawn in, which is a useful little life hack that we learned ourselves. But, with that, So Sea of Thieves does require site assistance, but Rare have been working with, they've been adding small updates, but useful ones as well. And they've been listening to the worldwide Sea of Thieves community, including multiple gamers without sight, who've been giving feedback, and they've been acting on it in a really, really good way, because they've been, then tweaking those features they put in with feedback with more feedback, which is a great way to do it. And I have no doubt there's going to be more to come. I have no doubt that that's going to happen. And one day I'd love to captain a ship as a gamer without sight with an entire crew of gamers without sight. That would be phenomenal if they, if that were able to happen. And I'm sure it could, with the right sort of tools and elements in game to make it possible. But until that time does come, I will keep doing what I can, talking accessibility to pretty much anyone who will listen, giving suggestions, throwing requests at Rev via their official portals and request pages, and just generally passing all the feedback I can along to, to those who can act on it. But also just showing that gaming without sight, not only in Sea of Thieves, but in general, is possible through my live streams, through my YouTube content, through, interactions in general, and through events like this, of course. But I hope this has been insightful and enjoyable. I hope you've learned something from this, and I will be taking questions in a little. I will have a link slide up at the end if you want my contact information as well. But I've been SightlessKombat, and I really hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, we're back. So, SK, thank you. For those who joined late, I'm Travis, I'm your moderator, and let's just dive right into the questions because we have a lot. And thank you.
By the way, sorry, the links are now, I'm not sure whether they are on screen, but I've put the slide into focus, so they should now be visible to you for those of you who can see it.
Yeah, for sighted guests, the links are on screen. If you're not sighted,
they are in the slides
PDF
that are available online anyway. So yeah.
All right. So you ready for some questions?
Yeah, questions. Go ahead.
Before it wasn't really a question, but I want to just give a nod here from Rare, and wanted to just say it's always nice to hear you talk about your and share your journey, and for being a part of ours. So not really a question, but thought that was worth noting.
Yes, definitely. That is huge. That is amazing. glad to know that people from Rare, come along to these to find out, how everything ticks, really.
I thought that was very cool as well. So let's get into some questions. Here's one that's fairly popular. How do you find the Sea of Thieves online community response compares to other online games regarding specifically accessibility?
That's an interesting one. I feel like the attitudes may have changed to an extent, but there are still people who definitely don't understand, or they're deliberately trolling, in terms of they're not understanding why features are being implemented, that kind of thing. And they want Rare to focus on other content that isn't accessibility, which is a real shame. Because that shouldn't be the way it is. Everybody should be able to play the same games with the same level of agency. So I should be able to play any game I want to without needing assistance. Other people with, say, fine motor conditions, should be able to do that as well. So but other communities, in terms of things like, say, Gears or Halo, people understand it at the very least, which is good. So there's parity there in terms of the Sea of Thieves community mostly gets it, but sometimes I've seen a few posts where they either don't, or they may not seem to. So that's always interesting to go in and try and clarify things, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Got you. Okay, thanks. Here's one. This is from Anonymous. What's your favorite accidental accessibility feature?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right.
Probably my favorite one of recent memory would be Dead Space's turning, like, sort of navigation to objective system. I can't think what they call it in that game, but essentially you push the camera. Don't forget, this was back in 2008 or 2010 for Dead Space 2, which refined it even further. But you press a button in and it will turn your camera towards the next objective, but not like necessarily straight through a wall or through a window like Gears of War 1 would have done it, but actually trying to pathfind you through, say, the corridors or through, doors or things. Sometimes it doesn't work when, doors are locked off due to objectives, or, you need to do a puzzle, or you need to, I don't know, go through a different entrance or something. But, if you consider that accessibility wasn't really a talking point back then, and then you think that was almost certainly not intended to work that way as an assistance feature, but it definitely helps a massive amount. And that's why I enjoyed playing both of those games. I'm looking forward to seeing if anything changes with Dead Space 3 when I eventually go to that at some point.
Great.
Yeah, good question though. Yeah.
But yeah, we've got a lot of good ones. I'm getting nervous on time. Let's see how many we can get through.
I'll try and be concise.
Yeah, I'll jump around. Let's see. How about this? Have you had any good experiences using virtual reality, augmented reality, or extended reality? If so, can you tell us about that? And that comes from Glenda.
Hi Glenda. Hello. That's a great question.
Hi, Glenda.
Yeah, so I actually own an Oculus Rift. I'm fortunate enough to have a Rift that I was sent for review, not by Oculus, but a while ago. And one of my best experiences of that is probably Rock Band VR or Creed Rise to Glory, neither of which are fully accessible, unfortunately. But Rock Band VR, is very, very immersive. It's a lot of fun if you can, of course, get an instrument to work with it. Because the audio was great, and you could navigate the menus using the strum bar. At least when I tried it, you could sort of do that, and that was a lot of fun. Creed, I needed accessibility to get into the fighting because it's a boxing game, but once I was in a fight, the actual sort of blocking and then retaliatory punching thing was actually pretty easy to pick up. But no game, I've only played one game that's fully accessible, and that was as part of a research project. But that definitely gives me hope, the fact that people are looking into it. It's just that there aren't very many accessible experiences yet, and the interfaces aren't often accessible either, which kind of is its own barrier to entry. But yeah, great question, and I look forward to seeing where that industry goes in the near and further future.
Very cool. Okay. I'm going to go down now with upvotes because we have so many good questions, and I don't want to be play favorites here. So how do you and your crew handle the rampant griefing in this game? Is this the question from Anonymous. Have you ever wished there was a non-open PvP version of the game?
I'll be honest, there have been times that we have. There's times where you will get griefed. I think on one of my early streams I did, we just had real issues with it, where we got sunk about 4 or 5 times in a row, and it just sucked. It wasn't fun. but I wouldn't say necessarily a non-PvP thing, like a specific non-PvP server or anything would be the best answer. Maybe just having it be like a flag you can turn on, not a pirate flag, of course, but like a sort of thing in the code.
Sure.
Like a sort of an option you can say, right, as a crew, we don't want PvP. So if any actual players fire on you, then I don't know, cannonballs just face straight through your ship, kind of thing, and it comes up like with a certain symbol above the ship or something to say, these people don't want to fight. So there could be something like that, I guess. But yeah, it does suck. It's not happened for a long time, thankfully, because we don't tend to run into players, but it has been a problem before.
Okay, so
should we try and end on a lighter question, or sorry, a light question?
Well, I've got a really easy one actually that I think is going to be helpful to others. This is from Emily. Is there a Discord servers for gamers using assistive technology?
Well, there are multiple Discord servers. I'm part of a few, but I actually have my own as well. I don't have a link to hand, but I'm sure we could get that passed on somehow. I'm sure we could.
That sounds like an invitation to DM you. That's what that is.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Feel free. I don't have my Discord on any of my social stuff. Actually, I've just realised. But if you DM me privately through Twitter, and yeah, Twitter's probably the best place to get me. Generally, if you message me through there, let me know you've seen me here. Then I will gladly reach out to you, give you the link to my server, because I do my stream announcements there. Generally, have a chat. There's a bunch of my community there, including my crew for Sea of Thieves. So if you wanted to pick their brains as well, after watching this presentation, then I'm sure they would be willing to oblige. So in which case, I look forward to hopefully conversing further with you and others of a similar interest as well in hopefully the near
Okay.
future.
Let's leave that door open for the ones that we didn't get to, because we have had a lot of chatter here, which has really been awesome. Let's do one more. This is a great one. When looking for accessibility features in a new game, what do you recommend for game designers? Do you want everything in an accessibility settings menu? Question. And and that one comes from Glenda too. I gave her two. She asks good questions.
Yeah, no, agreed. So it depends on who you are. So personally, I like all of my things being in accessibility menus because I don't like to hunt through all of the different menus to see if there's an option that I need. So things like, I don't know, auto aim or navigation and traversal assist or audio cues, volumes, or audio cues at all. I don't want to have to hunt through the menus for those. Other people believe that there shouldn't be an accessibility menu to, avoid stigma, that kind of thing, which I kind of understand. I see the logic of it at the very least. But it depends on the user. So the best thing you can do as game designers is get accessibility consultants like myself and so many others, around the world, pull from that multinational, international pool of resources, and use that feedback to then shape your game. So I am always willing to talk to, as I say, anyone who'll listen, whether it's in games or out of games. And that's a great question because it varies so much, and you could have multiple consultants that say different things. And then if you have that, then it's down to you. It's down to what you believe would be best, not just by the numbers, but by what you sometimes feel would be best, and your own logic and thought process behind that. That's a great question, though. That's a really good one.
I know, and so
Like
we are
so
out
many,
of time.
like all of the others.
We're out of time, but I'm gonna break the rules and get slapped on the wrist because there is a question here that I think would be really beneficial to everyone if you have an answer for it. This comes from Mike.
I'll try. Okay.
This comes from Mike. He says, "I'm a game developer after hours, and I'm interested in learning how to make different kinds of games accessible. Are there resources out there for that?"
Yes, there are. There are things. Well, other than of course consultants, there are the game accessibility guidelines. Xbox has documentation on it. I know Oculus did some VR accessibility stuff as well. They've published some things, though that it didn't cover Gamers Without Sight when I last looked at it. Unity and Unreal are looking at stuff at the moment. There are so many resources you can look to. Even looking back at things like GA Confs, Game Accessibility Conference, where I've presented, or other consultants have presented as well. Or the Microsoft Gaming and Disability boot camps. There are so many places you can go to look for resources. And Microsoft even has a course on it as well, a course on accessibility as well, which is great. So there's a lot of places you can go and look. And as I've said before, if there's anything you want to ask me, either to clarify these points or if you want to clarify these points or other ones as well, or you want to just ask further questions, feel free to message me on Twitter, and I will get back to you and give you Discord information or Twitch, YouTube, other things. But as I say, if you get me on Twitter, then I will definitely see it. So I look forward to seeing where all of you go. And good luck with the development, Mike, as well. Good luck with that, and I look forward to seeing what you put out.
Yeah, that was awesome. With that, we are over time, so I'm going to have to close it down. For those that didn't get to the questions, check out the slides on the session page, and you can follow SK on all of the various platforms, Twitch, obviously, Twitter, YouTube.
I was going to say, for those who can't see it, you can follow me and just want to have a rough thing for now and don't want to have to look it up. I am at SightlessKombat, so SightlessKombat on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and various other places as well. So if you want to find me on any of those and follow my progress, including the fact that I'm streaming Horizon Forbidden West tonight. So if you want to see how that works with PS5, then come along at 7 p.m. GMT. And Friday, I'm doing an audio described continuation of my playthrough with Janissary of God of War. So if you want to hear more about that, then come on there. They're my next two streams. I won't go through the whole schedule. But
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I want to reiterate that's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great fun.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing all of you at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks, attendees. Thank you, SK. And I'll see you tonight on Twitch. And everybody enjoy the rest of AxeCon.
Indeed. Have a good AxeCon, everybody.